The dust devils danced their timeless waltz across the sun-baked plains of New Mexico, a familiar sight for Jedediah Stone. At 72, Jed's hands were as gnarled as the mesquite roots that clung to the dry earth, his eyes as sharp as a hawk's. For 5 decades, he'd coaxed a living from this unforgiving land, his small ranch a testament to sheer grit. This morning, however, something was different. A cold dread, a feeling he hadn't known since the war, settled in his gut as he approached his barn. The sun, just breaching the eastern mesa, cast long, distorted shadows, making the world feel alien. Jed squinted. There, gouged into the sturdy wooden planks of his barn's south wall, were 3 colossal claw marks. Each furrow was as wide as his arm and stretched nearly 10 feet from top to bottom. The wood was splintered, raw, exposing the lighter grain beneath. This wasn't the work of a bear. No bear he'd ever seen had claws that size, nor would one attack a barn in such a deliberate, vertical swipe. Jed ran a trembling hand over the gashes. The wood felt rough, almost burned at the edges. He walked around the barn, scanning the ground for tracks, but the hard-packed earth revealed nothing save the usual hoofprints of his horses and the faint, dusty trails of rabbits. His mind raced, pulling at old campfire tales of mythical beasts, of things that lurked in the canyons and badlands, whispered by old-timers over weak coffee. He scoffed at the thought, but the unease persisted. This was real. These marks were real. He spent the morning in a daze, checking his cattle, loading hay, his eyes constantly darting back to the scarred barn. The sheer power required to inflict such damage was staggering. By noon, a few of his neighbors rode by on their way to town, and Jed, a man who preferred solitude, found himself unusually eager for company. He pointed out the marks, and a hushed silence fell over the small group. Old man Hemmings, who'd seen more strange things than most, simply shook his head, his face pale. "Never seen nothing like it, Jed. Looks like something from another world." The words echoed in Jed's mind long after they left. Another world. It was a terrifying thought, one that burrowed deep into the quiet corners of his fear. The wind picked up, swirling dust around the barn, making the claw marks seem to pulse in the shifting light. Jed clutched the old rifle he always carried, its familiar weight a small comfort against the growing unease. What had made those marks? And would it return? If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next thrilling chapter. The next few days were a blur of nervous tension for Jed. He slept fitfully, his dreams haunted by monstrous shadows and splintering wood. He took to patrolling his property at night, his old double-barrel shotgun resting across his lap, the cold desert air doing little to calm his frayed nerves. The community, initially skeptical, began to buzz with the news of Jed's barn. Cowboys on their way to distant ranches would detour to gawk, their faces a mixture of fear and fascination. Whispers started circulating like wildfire. Some spoke of the thunderbird, a massive mythological bird of Native American lore whose talons could tear through rock. Others murmured about the skinwalker, a Navajo witch capable of transforming into animals, though Jed dismissed this, knowing the local tribes held such beliefs sacred and rarely spoke of them to outsiders. More practical minds suggested a rogue grizzly, despite no grizzlies having been seen in these parts for decades. The explanations, no matter how outlandish, only fueled the sense of an inexplicable threat. One afternoon, as Jed was repairing a fence, a sleek, dusty buggy pulled up. A young woman, no older than 25, emerged. She had intelligent, curious eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and a sensible dress that was already speckled with dust. "Mr. Stone, my name is Dr. Eleanor Vance. I'm an archaeologist from the Smithsonian, working on a dig near the Rio Grande. I heard about your barn." Her voice was calm, professional, yet tinged with an undeniable excitement. Jed eyed her suspiciously. "Archaeologist, eh? What's that got to do with my barn? Eleanor gestured towards the gashes. Stories like this often have roots in natural phenomena, Mr. Stone. Or, more intriguingly, in human activity that might be misinterpreted. My work involves understanding past cultures through their physical remnants. Sometimes, what people believe to be supernatural is simply a lack of understanding of ancient practices or unusual geological occurrences. She pulled out a small notebook and a magnifying glass. May I examine them? Jed, despite his reservations, found himself intrigued by her calm demeanor and logical approach. He watched as she meticulously studied the marks, her fingers tracing the splinters, her brow furrowed in concentration. She wasn't just gawking, she was thinking. The wood is deeply scored, almost torn, and look at the edges, she pointed. There's a residue, almost like scorched earth. Very curious. Her presence, oddly, brought a sliver of rational thought back to the chaos in Jed's mind. Maybe, just maybe, there was an explanation that didn't involve monsters or angry spirits. But what could it be? Eleanor spent the better part of the next day at Jed's ranch, meticulously examining the barn marks. She took samples of the wood, sketching the patterns, and even digging small trenches around the barn's foundation, searching for any accompanying tracks or disturbances. Jed, initially wary, found himself warming to her quiet determination. She wasn't dismissive of his fears, but her focus remained on tangible evidence. The depth and consistency of these gouges suggest something with immense power, Eleanor explained, wiping dust from her brow. And the slight scorching. It's peculiar. It's not a natural burn, more like intense friction. Could almost be a metallic residue, or something similar. She paused, her gaze drifting towards the distant jagged peaks of the Dragoon Mountains. Have you noticed anything else unusual, Mr. Stone? Any strange lights, sounds, or disappearances? Jed stiffened. Disappearances, what are you talking about? There have been whispers in town, Eleanor said cautiously, mostly from traveling prospectors and traders. Talk of a few homesteaders' wives and their children from isolated ranches further north, up towards the canyons, simply vanishing. No signs of struggle, just empty homes. It's usually dismissed as families packing up and leaving, but the pattern is unsettlingly consistent. A cold knot formed in Jed's stomach. He'd heard those rumors too, but had dismissed them as frontier gossip, people moving on. Now, linked with the barn marks, it sounded far more sinister. Folks move on all the time out here, he grumbled, though his voice lacked conviction. Just then, a rider approached, kicking up a plume of dust. It was Ben Carter, a young, strapping rancher from a neighboring spread, known for his straight shooting and quiet reliability. Ben pulled his horse to a halt, his eyes fixed on Eleanor. He'd heard about the city woman poking around Jed's place. Mr. Stone, ma'am, he nodded, then turned to Jed. My wife's cousin Martha and her 2 young ones. They haven't been seen in over a week. Their ranch is deserted. Thought she'd gone to visit family, but nobody's heard from her. Jed and Eleanor exchanged a grim look. The pieces, however disparate, were starting to fit into a chilling picture. Eleanor pointed to the claw marks. Ben, these marks and the disappearances, I believe they might be connected. This isn't some monster. It's too precise. It feels like a cover-up or a diversion, something deliberate. Ben, usually a man of few words, looked from the marks to Eleanor, then back to Jed. What do we do? The sheriff in town, he just says folks move on. He won't do a thing. We go to the canyons, Eleanor stated, her voice firm. That's where the trails of these vanishings seem to lead. And if these marks are a distraction, the true threat lies there. We need to find out what really made these marks and why people are disappearing. An unlikely alliance had just formed, forged by an old farmer's fear, a young archaeologist's curiosity, and a rancher's desperate hope. The morning air was crisp and biting as Jed, Ben, and Eleanor set out. Jed, astride his sturdy mare, carried his rifle and a sense of grim determination. Ben, on his powerful quarter horse, had a repeater slung across his back, his jaw set. Eleanor, surprisingly resilient, rode a rented mule, her satchel filled with maps, a compass, and a small pickaxe. Their destination, the labyrinthine canyons that snaked through the rugged landscape, a place of stark beauty and hidden dangers. The journey was arduous. The terrain grew rougher as they ascended, the familiar saguaro cacti giving way to thorny brush and jagged rock formations. Jed navigated by instinct, following faint deer trails and the subtle shifts in the wind. The silence of the desert was profound, broken only by the rhythmic creak of saddle leather and the occasional whinny of a horse. A sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air, a silent promise of what lay ahead. As they delved deeper, the canyon walls rose dramatically, casting long, cool shadows. The sun, a fiery orb in the vast sky, struggled to penetrate the depths. Here, the landscape felt ancient, untouched by time. Eleanor pointed out faint petroglyphs on cave walls, remnants of long-vanished peoples, but her focus remained on the ground. "See these small depressions, Jed?" she asked, kneeling. "They're not natural. They look like drag marks or something heavy being pulled." Jed frowned, examining the faint disturbances. They weren't animal tracks. They were too uniform, too deliberate. The occasional broken twig, a disturbed stone, all pointed towards a path. Ben, scanning the horizon with a hunter's eye, suddenly held up a hand. "Smoke. Faint, but it's there. Up ahead, near that cluster of red rocks." Hope and dread mixed in Jed's heart. Smoke meant people. But what kind of people? As they cautiously approached, dismounting and proceeding on foot, the air grew heavy with the scent of wood smoke and something else. Something metallic, almost like iron. The canyon floor widened into a hidden alcove, a natural amphitheater concealed from above. And there, amidst a makeshift camp, they saw them. Not creatures from folklore, but men. Rough, grizzled figures armed with rifles guarding a crude lean-to, and beside the lean-to, a pile of what looked like freshly excavated earth. These weren't prospectors. These were something far more menacing, and then a child's faint whimper drifted from within the lean-to. The truth, raw and terrifying, began to reveal itself. If you've been captivated by this journey, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Don't miss how this mystery unfolds. Jed, Ben, and Eleanor retreated to a rocky outcrop, observing the camp from a safe distance. The initial shock gave way to grim understanding. These men weren't part of any local ranching community. Their clothes were tattered, but seemed to bear a uniform look, their movements efficient, almost militaristic. There were at least 6 of them, heavily armed. "Who are they?" Ben whispered, his hand instinctively gripping his rifle. Eleanor, peering through a small spyglass, frowned. "Look at their tools, Ben, and the way they're handling that ore. It's not gold, it looks like iron ore. And they're clearly not just mining. There's something else happening here." She adjusted the lens, and see the large metal contraption near the back. It looks like some kind of winch or lever system used for heavy lifting. Jed's mind raced. The claw marks, the scorching. He looked at the massive, jagged rock face above the camp. Could it be? "Eleanor," he said slowly, "those marks on my barn, were they from something being dragged?" Eleanor's eyes widened. "That makes sense. The friction, the depth. If they were pulling something immensely heavy and sharp across a surface, something made of iron, perhaps? And those drag marks I found earlier, it could be their path." The realization hit them like a physical blow. The monster wasn't a monster at all. It was a cover-up. These men were clearly involved in some illicit activity, using the fear of a mythical beast to keep people away. But what about the missing women and children? As if on cue, one of the men roughly pulled a young woman from the lean-to. Her face was smudged with dirt and tears, her clothes torn. Behind her, Jed could glimpse the terrified faces of other women and several small children. Martha, Ben's cousin, was among them. "They're not just mining," Ben growled, his voice tight with rage. "They're holding them hostage. For what?" Eleanor, her face pale but determined, lowered her spyglass. "This isn't a simple kidnapping, Ben. They're too organized. Look at the camp, the guards. This is a deliberate operation. My guess is they're using these people for forced labor, perhaps to work the mine they've unearthed, or to help transport something of value." The implications were chilling. These men were exploiting the very isolation of the canyons and the superstitious fears of the frontier to carry out their crimes. The giant claw marks were a brilliant, terrifying ruse. But knowing the truth didn't make the situation any less dangerous. Now they had to figure out how to rescue the captives without getting themselves caught or killed. The three unlikely allies hunkered down, formulating a plan. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, making the canyon floor shimmer. The grim reality of their situation weighed heavily. 6 armed men, likely desperate, against an old farmer, a rancher, and an archaeologist. The odds were stacked against them. "We can't just storm in," Jed stated, his voice raspy. "They'll kill 'em all." Ben nodded, his knuckles white around his rifle. "We need to get the drop on them, maybe at night when some of them are asleep." Eleanor, surprisingly, shook her head. "No, that's too risky. What if we miss one? What if they have an alarm system or tripwires? And what if there are more of them hidden in the canyon we haven't seen?" Her gaze swept over the rugged terrain. "We need a diversion. Something that will draw them away from the captives and divide their numbers." She pointed to the cliff face above the camp. "Those marks on your barn, Jed, the ones caused by their equipment. They suggest heavy lifting, and that winch system down there proves it. They're probably using it to move something large from the top of the canyon, or extract it from a deep shaft. They wouldn't be able to do that without a pathway or a system of ropes and pulleys up there." A flicker of understanding passed between Jed and Ben. "You mean we target their operation?" Jed asked. "Exactly," Eleanor confirmed. "If we can disable their equipment, or create a disturbance that sounds like a rockfall or a major equipment malfunction, it will draw their attention away from the captives. They'll have to investigate, leaving the lean-to vulnerable. That's when we move in." The plan was risky, relying on stealth and perfect timing. Jed, with his intimate knowledge of the canyon's hidden nooks and crannies, would find a way to approach the equipment from above. Ben, the best shot, would provide cover and ensure no one slipped past them. Eleanor, surprisingly, insisted on being part of the assault group. "I know how these mechanisms work, Jed. I can help disable it quickly, and I can identify any secondary escape routes they might have planned." A chill wind swept through the canyon, a precursor to the rapidly approaching dusk. The air grew cold, carrying with it the scent of fear and desperation. The fate of the captives and their own lives rested on this desperate gamble. They had only a few hours of daylight left to prepare. As twilight painted the canyon walls in hues of orange and purple, the three began their ascent. Jed, despite his age, moved with surprising agility, his weathered boots finding purchase on the loose scree. Ben followed, his powerful frame navigating the treacherous path with practiced ease. Eleanor, though not as accustomed to the rugged terrain, pushed through her fatigue, her mind focused on the task. They found a narrow, winding goat trail that led to a ledge high above the camp. From there, they could see the rudimentary mining operation more clearly. A crude derrick stood beside a gaping hole in the earth, and a massive, sharp-edged iron scoop, or plough, clearly the culprit behind Jed's barn marks, lay half-buried in a pile of freshly dug earth. It was connected by thick ropes and chains to a powerful hand-cranked winch system. This was what they were using to move large quantities of earth, and perhaps to create the terrifying claw marks as a deliberate scare tactic. "That winch is their lifeline," Eleanor whispered, pointing. "If we can jam its gears or cut the main ropes, it will create enough noise and confusion to draw them away." Jed nodded, his eyes scanning the camp below. 2 guards stood near the lean-to, while the others were busy with the day's haul. The fire was burning low, casting flickering shadows that danced with their anxiety. "Ben, you take position on that rocky outcrop," Jed instructed, pointing. "Give us cover. Eleanor and I will go for the winch." The descent to the derrick was even more perilous than the climb. Loose rocks shifted beneath their feet, threatening to send them tumbling. The air grew colder, and a sharp, biting wind swept through the canyon. Finally, they reached the derrick, just a few yards from the sleeping forms of 2 guards. Jed crept forward, his old hunting knife glinting in the faint moonlight. With swift, silent movements, he incapacitated the guards, tying them securely. Eleanor, meanwhile, was already at the winch. Her fingers flew, undoing bolts, disconnecting levers. With a final, determined heave, she pulled a heavy lever. The sound that followed was deafening. A grinding, screeching metallic roar, followed by the snapping of thick ropes and the thunderous crash of the iron scoop plummeting back into the earth. The camp erupted. Shouts, curses, and the frantic barking of dogs filled the canyon. The remaining guards immediately rushed towards the sound, their attention wholly diverted from the lean-to. "Now, Ben!" Jed yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. "To the captives!" As Ben opened fire, targeting the now exposed guards, Jed and Eleanor raced towards the lean-to. The element of surprise was theirs, but the fight was far from over. If you're on the edge of your seat, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories and hit the bell for notifications. Chaos reigned in the canyon. The sound of Ben's rifle shots echoed off the rock walls, mingling with the shouts of the confused guards. Jed and Eleanor reached the lean-to, where terrified women and children huddled together. "It's Jedediah Stone," Jed announced, his voice firm but reassuring. "We're here to get you out." Martha, Ben's cousin, pushed forward, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. "Jed! Thank God! They forced us to dig, to haul ore. They said they'd kill us if we resisted." "No more," Eleanor stated, her voice surprisingly strong. "We've disabled their main equipment. They're scattered." She quickly began untying the ropes that bound the captives, her movements swift and efficient. Outside, Ben was a whirlwind of controlled aggression. He moved from cover to cover, his shots precise, targeting legs and arms, aiming to disable rather than kill. The bandits, caught off guard, struggled to organize a coherent response. Their focus was split between the ruined winch and the sudden precise gunfire from the canyon walls. One of the bandits, a hulking brute, charged Jed and Eleanor, a crude pickaxe raised. Jed, despite his age, reacted with surprising speed. He met the charge head-on, deflecting the blow with his rifle butt and sending the man sprawling. Eleanor, seizing the opportunity, kicked the pickaxe away. "Move, all of you!" Jed urged the captives, herding them towards a less steep exit route he knew. The women, some carrying their children, stumbled out of the lean-to, their eyes still wide with fear, but hope beginning to flicker. Just as they were about to make their escape, the bandit leader, a man with a cold, calculating gaze, appeared, his rifle leveled at Jed. "You old fool, you've ruined everything." Ben's shot rang out, true and swift. The bandit leader cried out, his arm dropping to his side, his rifle clattering to the ground. He glared at Ben, then Jed, his eyes filled with venomous hatred before he fled into the deeper recesses of the canyon, his remaining men following him, melting into the shadows like frightened coyotes. The canyon, moments ago filled with the cacophony of battle, fell silent save for the ragged breaths of the freed captives and the distant echoes of retreating footsteps. Jed looked at Eleanor, then at Ben, a silent understanding passing between them. They had done it. They had faced the monster and found it to be nothing more than human cruelty. The journey back to Jed's ranch was slow, but filled with an overwhelming sense of relief. The freed women and children were weak but alive, their tears of fear now replaced by tears of gratitude. Martha clung to Ben, her face buried in his shoulder. The sun was rising, painting the desert in soft hues, a stark contrast to the grim darkness of the canyon. Upon reaching Jed's ranch, the first order of business was tending to the captives. Jed's meager larder was opened, and Eleanor, with surprisingly practical skills, helped organize the distribution of food and water, while Ben rode off to alert the nearest small town's sheriff, a different, more diligent one than the one who had dismissed the disappearances. As the women and children rested, Jed and Eleanor finally had a moment to fully process what they had uncovered. The bandits were not just ordinary criminals. They were a well-organized gang involved in illegal mining, possibly even using the remote canyon to hide a larger operation. The giant claw marks on Jed's barn were a clever, fear-mongering tactic. They must have used that large iron scoop or a similar piece of equipment, Eleanor explained, pointing to her sketches. They'd drag it across surfaces to simulate something monstrous, creating a local legend to keep people away from their operation. The scorching, I observed, could have been residual friction heat, or even a deliberate attempt to make the marks look more sinister with some sort of chemical. Jed nodded slowly. So, all that talk of monsters and spirits, it was just to cover up their thieving and their cruelty. The realization was both simple and profound, stripping away the mystery and revealing the ugliness of human greed. When the sheriff finally arrived with a small posse, he was initially skeptical, but the sight of the traumatized captives and Jed's unwavering account, backed by Eleanor's logical explanations and Ben's first-hand testimony, convinced him. A larger search party was immediately dispatched to the canyon, though it was likely the bandits were long gone. The community, upon hearing the full story, was abuzz. The fear of the unknown dissipated, replaced by anger at the deception and gratitude for Jed, Ben, and Eleanor. The terrifying monster of the plains was unmasked as human villainy, a far more chilling reality, but one that could be fought. Jed looked at his scarred barn. The marks no longer filled him with dread, but with a quiet sense of triumph. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal on Jed's ranch, though nothing was quite the same. The rescued families were reunited with their loved ones or found new homes if theirs had been completely abandoned. The story of Jed, Ben, and Eleanor became a local legend, a testament to courage and the power of human ingenuity over superstition. Eleanor Vance, her archaeological research temporarily sidelined, helped coordinate efforts to document the bandits' camp, providing valuable insights to the authorities. Her initial fascination with ancient cultures had led her to uncover a very modern crime, and her experience in the canyon had deepened her understanding of human resilience. She wrote extensive reports, her work now focused on the intersection of folklore and reality, and the ways in which human actions could be misinterpreted as supernatural. She often returned to Jed's ranch, finding a strange solace in the quiet plains and an unexpected friendship with the old farmer. Ben Carter became a local hero. He continued to ranch, but his dedication to justice was rekindled. He began working with the new sheriff, using his knowledge of the land to track down other illicit operations and protect the vulnerable. He often spoke of Martha's rescue, a constant reminder of the danger that still lurked in the wild, but also of the strength found in community. Jedediah Stone, the old farmer who had just wanted to live out his days in peace, found himself a changed man. The fear that had gripped him vanished, replaced by a quiet confidence. The claw marks on his barn, once a source of terror, became a symbol of his courage, a story he would tell with a wry smile to any traveler who stopped by. He even allowed Eleanor to study the barn, hypothesizing on the exact methods the bandits used to create the marks. They were, she concluded, likely created by a specialized heavy iron plow, perhaps weighted, dragged repeatedly along the barn wall with the aid of a horse or oxen, creating the deep gouges and scorched friction marks designed to mimic a beast's formidable attack. The canyons still held their secrets, but the most terrifying one had been brought into the light. The experience had taught them that true monsters often wore human faces, and that the strongest bonds were forged in the face of adversity. Jed continued to work his land, but now he also watched the horizons with a new sense of purpose, knowing that even in the vast, untamed wilderness, human connection and resolve could overcome even the most elaborate deceptions. The sun set over the plains, casting long shadows, but this time they held no fear, only the promise of a peaceful night. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through the Old West. If you enjoyed The Old Farmer and the Canyon's Secret, please subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories and hit the notification bell so you never miss an adventure.